Previously I was talking about praise and blame as part of the 8 worldly concerns, and today I'm going to focus on gain and loss. The teachings tell us that the more attached we are to having money and possessions, the more we suffer. And I was not raised with that perspective because my parents were, they were born in the late 20s, so they grew up during the Depression. And by the time they started having children, it was post-World War II, and money meant success. And the more that you had, the better. So that was the culture that I was raised in. And also I remember playing the game Easy Money, which is a version of Monopoly. I don't know if you ever played it, but it's the acquisition of money and property. And of course, the more money you have, the more property you can buy, and then you become this big landlord person with lots of bucks. And the game ends, if you've got lots of money, you're the winner, or lots of property, and if you don't, then you're the loser. And winning always felt good. So that was the kind of culture that I was most familiar with. And then at the same time, I grew up in a family where we did not have much money at all. And I still saw my mom writing a check every week to make an offering to the church. And I didn't really get what that was about, but I knew it was important to her. And in retrospect, I think it would have been very good if she would have invited my siblings and I even to put in a few pennies into that envelope and to teach us about making offerings from our heart, even if it's that little amount. But there wasn't a lot of spare cash in those days, so I can understand that that just was not in her scheme of understanding. So then, of course, I continued with my life, and I went through periods of having very little, and then eventually I knew that if I continued with certain aspects of my life, I would be guaranteed living in poverty. So this inspired a return to university to get a real job. So once I had the real job, then I started living with a person who was a collector. And at first it was just things that didn't cost much money because we both didn't have much money. So pretty soon the living room was filling up with things that you could find anywhere, like fossils and petrified wood, and this eventually shifted to dinosaur bones, and eventually my friend had some cash, and so he started buying dinosaur bones. And so at one point we had this huge thigh bone of some common dinosaur in our living room, and then eventually we started having he had a great skill for finding anything dinosaur, so he found dinosaur footprints. And so he actually carried out these dinosaur footprints in almost concrete-like formations. So pretty soon the living room was dinosaur footprints, thigh bones, dinosaur teeth, you name it, dead birds, anything that you could find in nature. So people would come to our home and it was like, a living museum. But it didn't stop there, because after a while, and I got drawn into this too, after a while we both had a bit more money, and now it was time to start collecting things that a friend of ours was selling from India. And these were authentic antiquities. They're very beautiful, really interesting, really gorgeous. So every time our friend had a sale, the two of us would go, we'd be some of the first people at their house, and we'd buy many things. I'm not kidding, many things. And for a while, when you get something new, there's this buzz, and it's like exciting, and I never felt that it made me happy. And I couldn't really see that it made my friend happy after a day, but the house continued to fill up with stuff. And of course, when our friends came over, there was a lot of feedback about how fascinating this stuff was. So that encourages us to get more because of that feedback. So this went on. And then the focus for my friend shifted to collecting North American Indian artifacts that had spiritual significance. So like there's something called a medicine bag that's beaded. And these things on the world market are still more precious than many famous paintings, and their value continues to increase every day because they're rare and collectors worldwide want them. So this started a new thing of collecting. So more and more our house is looking like a museum, and the Glenbow Foundation, I'm sure, was wondering where the things that they wanted to buy were going. They're going into our house. So this continued, And then one year, we were both away for a period of 3 days. So the house, oh, I should mention too, that prior to this, collectors of all these kinds of things were coming to our house to look at the collections. And so sometimes my friend knew who they were, and sometimes he didn't. There was just someone who would phone, hey, I heard you've got this great medicine bag. So they'd come over and take a look. And then they'd see everything else in the house. They'd get a grand tour. So one day, I was away at a retreat at Cloud Mountain with venerable children, and my friend was away doing something else, and the house was left unattended for 3 days. And in that 3-day period, someone had been watching. And so professional thieves entered our home, and they took the most precious things. They took the North American Indian artifacts, and they took everything else too to make it look like a regular theft. But they took some of my things that were hard to lose, and they took very many things of my friends that were very painful. So what I then saw was excruciating to watch. When I found out about the theft, I was still coming back from this Cloud Mountain retreat, and I had just found out that I didn't have cancer. So I was elated. I had been meditating on death that week like crazy. And I found out I had a bit more time to maybe make my life meaningful. On the other hand, my friend had no dharma. He had just lost the most precious things in his life, and he was almost destroyed by this. It was so painful. So when I got the phone call, my concern was, were you there when they came and robbed the house? Were you hurt? And he wasn't there. So it was like, oh, thank heavens. So unfortunately, I wasn't using my giraffe ears when he told me about all the stuff that went missing. I just kept saying, well, you know, it's so fantastic that you weren't there. And, you know, I went on with that, and that was not comforting to my friend who had just lost, you know, the collection of his lifetime. So in looking at that whole experience of getting it and losing it, the main focus for both of us was me, my collection, my stuff. Isn't this interesting? I used my money to get those gorgeous things. Look how interesting I am. And it just builds this solid sense of I more and more and more. And then when that's gone, when that's taken away, I saw parts of my friend, it looked like he was dying in a certain way. I mean, for a period of time, he was dying. He was grieving that kind of loss. It was made worse by the fact that the police were involved, and then the local newspapers were involved, and the television stations were involved. And so again, for my friend, this just amplified the loss unbelievably. And then then my friend hired a psychic, because someone told him that this particular woman often was employed by the police force in town. So she came over and spent 3 days at her house. And initially, I think her price tag for the visits was either $9,000 or $19,000, because she thought that my friend was loaded. Well, he wasn't. And when he started to tell her our situation, I think she dropped the fee to either $1,900 or $2,100. So that on top of the loss, you know, then there's this financial fee. So the suffering in gain and loss is huge in my experience. I never once saw that getting those things made either of us truly happy. It just made us want more. It increased the coveting through the ceiling. So in my own experience, this is not something that ever brings anyone happiness. When we see people invest in the stock market and they are ahead for a while, they may look like they're happy, but then the stock market always changes. And then, as we know, it brings huge suffering. It can ruin families. It can ruin relationships. It just goes on and on. So if we look at the example, if I look at the example of our spiritual teachers, and I think about this deeply, I see that all that effort that I made in acquiring things really took me away from any kind of practice that I might have had at the time. And if you're consumed in getting things, you're consumed in doing all the activities required to get money. So instead, we should look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who just very recently, as we all know, was awarded the Templeton Prize, which was established in 1972. And this prize he just received is worth something like $1.1 million. And there was a recent BBC announcement that he has already decided where that's going, so he's giving it away. He gets this huge prize, the largest prize any individual has ever been awarded, and he's giving about $900,000 to save the children in India. He's giving about $125,000 for the Mind and Life Institute, and then the remaining money is going to a fund to educate Tibetan monks about science. So that's just so inspiring to see what people do who have a serious spiritual practice. When they receive things, they immediately pass it on to those who need it the most. So it's very inspiring. I think we can really look at our own, perhaps past activities of how we acquired things and what happened when we lost them, and see where we really want to put our energy in life.